tell you something. If you two never bother me again the rest of my life, I ain't giving them that stuff. I can't. There's good friends of mine out there say, well, he's divorced, you have to do it tough. That's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the money is. The most means that the boss is your boss.
Hey, welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canorsi, and I wanted to bring something sort of to attention today. We've talked about it over on the paid podcast, which the link is right down there. If you want to go ahead and join the award-winning podcast, the only mob genre content that has awards won. Just so that everybody knows, we are going to be coming back on YouTube live probably next week. I want to say next week. That's the plan. Nothing stops here. We've been working on a lot of different stuff behind the scenes. And all that being said, granted, this is not a big mobster type of thing we're going to talk about, but it's sort of a social issue that I think people need to sort of look at a little bit. And there's going to be some moral arguments to what Italy is doing as a country, but it is what it is. The only other thing that I'm going to say is this. I ignored things once or twice. There will not be a third time. Call it a warning, call it a threat, call it whatever you want. There will not be a third time. So we're just going to leave it right at that. So in case you're unfamiliar with this, we have been the only YouTube channel that has talked about this, and we're the only sort of outlet in the mob genre on YouTube to even talk about it. Nobody else does. And I don't understand why. You can't just talk about biographies and the same thing over and over again. You got to look for other things to talk about. And I don't get why nobody's talked about this, but it's a big deal. A very big deal. First, the Italian state under Giovanni Falcone, they would seize money to cut off the supply of food of the food chain of the mob. They couldn't get them any other way, so they had to go after the money. And Giovanni Falcone paid for that with his life. For decades, the Italian authorities couldn't hamstring the mob. Falcone comes up with his plan, and it sort of works until it didn't, and Totorina ensured that Giovanni Falcone would be dead for his actions. While the authorities in Italy have still continued to dismantle the mob and how they derive their income, they have a new way, and that is seizing the children of accused gangsters. Now, keep in mind, I didn't say convicted. Accused, there's a difference. Italy has not only renewed, but decided to expand a very controversial program to remove children from their mafia families to break the cycle of what they call criminal behavior being passed down to new generations. The Free to Choose project has been in place in Calabria region, which is the base of Andrangheta, since 2012. Now it's going to be extended into Sicily and Campania, basically going after Cosa Nostra and now the Camorra as well. The aim of the program is to remove children from the mob culture, which they were born into, and break the generational cycle of crime, giving the children a chance to live what they call a normal life. Authorities can remove a child if they can prove to a court that they are physically or mentally endangered by their family's criminality. So there's no emphasis on being found guilty, accusations. All they have to do is just assume that a child can be in physical or mental danger because of allegations. And that is kind of fucked up. I'm not going to lie to you. Police and social workers can swoop in without warning and take children away. The families have no say in the matter. So far, 150 children have been removed from their families and placed in foster care in secret locations around the country. 30 mothers have chosen to go with their children, and 7 also agreeing to act as witnesses for prosecutions. And that's a very, very small amount. And all this is another means to force people to cooperate with law enforcement and prosecutions. That's all this really is. The core problem and the hypocrisy in all of this is that the Italian mafia has historically been used by the state as a tool to suppress trade union and communist activity. It acted as a force that threatened the working class and maintained the status quo, favoring the interests of the elite and the elite ruling circles. And this created conditions for close cooperation between the mafia and various spheres of state power, including the government, the police, and political parties. And against that background, official statements about the desire to get rid of the mafia seem a little bit hypocritical, since mafia structures and other criminal organizations have proved to be a convenient instrument of control and manipulation in the past, and will continue to do so in the future when they become useful for maintaining power and deterring by terroristic means any possible threats from the exploited class or political opponents. So in other words, when people run for politics, they use the mafia to help them get in. Complete hypocrisy. Even if the children are removed from mafia families, they're still in a society where capitalism continues to shape the conditions for crime. And the emergence of new mafia gangs is only a matter of time. So the solution, in my opinion, is not to educate the children of the mob, but the only way to overcome the problems of the current social order is to replace it through the establishment of new, more progressive foundations. These bases should be characterized by public ownership and the means of production, sort of socialism. And that's only going to be achieved by the working class struggling for their own interests, independent from the capitalists in the capitalist system. In such a system, each person will realize his or her full potential. People will no longer fear tomorrow when they no longer have to struggle every day for survival. So the other core issue when we talk about this is whether or not Italy even has the legal right to do this. And there seems to be no oversight when it comes to these children and where they're placed. Not only are they circumventing the laws, which give parental rights, but they are hiding the children with essential strangers. So we did some digging, and in some of these cases, children have been molested and physically abused and beaten by foster care parents. And Italy is not answering the public as to why there is no real background check on those foster parents. Rather, they want to focus on the condemnation of the parents who in many cases have only been accused, but not convicted in a court of law. And the phrase freedom of choice is an oxymoron, because it's not really a choice at all, but rather the Gestapo coming in, seizing children in the middle of the night at machine gun point, and taking those children and disappearing into the night. And they have no legal right to have to explain to the parents where their children are going and why. And in many of these cases, as we said, the men are not convicted, they're just accused. And to make this even more interesting, Rome, more specifically the Vatican, which repulses me, backs this. But the Vatican historically has used the mob in the old days to get what they wanted. It's nothing new. It's the same hypocrisy from the Catholic Church that it's always been. And I'm a Catholic, so I'm just calling it out like it is. And according to the Italian courts, the family do get visitation rights. However, what they're not saying publicly is 92% of the 150 cases that the Italian court has allowed to publicly sort of come out, those families were all stripped of any rights to their children. So 8% of 100% are allowed visitation rights. Since 2012, there have been 40 proceedings that have limited or removed paternity rights with any person that is accused of mafia involvement. And it's specifically aimed at men. Now, I know what some of you may say, because you're going to have people on YouTube that would likely say this. Well, if you're an organized crime, maybe you shouldn't have children. Okay, I can understand that. But at the same time, what gives the Italian authorities the right to take children? Because I think you're doing more. I understand the moral complexity to this. You don't want children around the life. You don't want them going into the life. I understand that. But they're not stopping to think of the mental damage this is doing to a child who you rip out of the home at 3 years old, 4 years old. Don't tell them anything. Put them, 600 miles away with people he doesn't know, you don't think that damages them? So I just don't think this is the right way to do it. But like I said, we've been talking about this for over a year over on the podcast. We've talked about this on a couple of lives. But the reality is they have no legal right to do this. I don't think they give a fuck about the children. This is not about giving a fuck about the children. This is about trying to decimate the mob, which I get. I understand it. But there are other ways to do that. And what I think is going to happen is you're going to get one of these guys who's involved in the life, whose children are taken away, and he's going to kill government people. He's going to go ape shit. And rightfully so. I think most of you who have children, put yourself in that situation. Could you imagine if they did that in this country? You imagine if they did that in this country? The outrage? And I understand. They're trying to eradicate organized crime. I totally get it, but I think taking children is not the right thing to do. And I think that they owe the public some sort of explanation as to why 8% of 100% are allowed visitation rights. Or let's talk about the 92% of 150 cases where parents have no more rights. And this isn't about, and this is where my sticking point is. I'm not arguing the morality of being in the life. What I'm arguing to you is just being accused of something is not proof. But this is sort of like the way RICO laws are spoon-fed to people in this country. It's spoon-fed in a way to help the authorities get around certain things. And they're not putting out the cases where these children have been molested, physically beaten, and tortured. They're not doing any of that because there's no oversight from social services. None. And so if you take a child out of a home, and I'm just using this as one example, you take a child out of a home because the father is accused of being a gangster. You take him from Naples, you put him down near Sicily, and this kid gets abused sexually, emotionally, and physically. Were they really better off? No. And why exactly Italy is, it seems to be split 50-50 in Italy. 50% don't like it, 50% do. But when you get to the point where you're taking children in the middle of the night at gunpoint, there's something fucking wrong. That's not normal. That's not how you do things. Now, if they did court proceedings, and the court proceedings were, you are a convicted gangster, blah, blah, blah. According to this bylaw we have, we're going to put this on trial. If you lose, we're taking your child, or you get out of the mob. I don't think anybody would argue at that point. But you can't just show up at somebody's house with a machine gun and take their children. And they wonder why people like Toto Reno went ape shit and did what he did to Falcone. I'm not, and Borsellino, I'm not saying it was right. I'm not arguing that Toto Reno did the right thing. But could you put yourself in a situation? Toto Reno in charge now, and they started taking children. Holy crap. You think an explosion on a highway was bad? And I'm not arguing that being a criminal is a good thing. I'm not arguing that these parents are making the right decision by bringing their children into the life. I'm not making that argument. But you also can't say it's freedom of choice when you're taking a child out of a house with a fucking machine gun. That's not freedom of choice. That's some Nazi shit. So, you guys can decide whatever you want. Listen, the morality of being a gangster and having kids around, all of that kind of stuff, I get it. But there has to be a better way. There has to be a different way. And like I said, the government doesn't give a shit about your children. What they're trying to do is eradicate them by forcing them to become cooperators. You ever tried to push a round hole through a round peg through a square hole? Doesn't work, does it? It doesn't. And this isn't going to work either. So this is what's going on in Italy. The fact that they've now begun to spread this out throughout the region. It's going to get interesting. But I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right. But that's just my opinion. That's just my opinion. And for those of you that are going to say, oh, here he is defending gangsters, I'm not even doing that. I'm just defending the rights of parents. If you're convicted of something, hey, it is what it is. You knew the laws. But just being accused is not enough reason. And don't call it freedom of choice when you're sticking a fucking burner in parents' face and stealing children. It would be different if they had court proceedings. They came and got the children and said, by the way, your children are going to be in this region until we can figure this out. Okay, but they don't have to tell anybody. It's just not right. It's not right. Anyway, that's it. I just wanted to come on for a couple minutes. We will be on live next week. So please join us. And we got a lot of new content coming. So all that being said, have a good week, and we'll see everybody next week on the live.